Hi, I'm Joy Vernon, and this is the second in the series of videos that I am creating around the blog posts that I have written. I am going sequentially through my blog posts and sharing them with you, providing some commentary, some thoughts. Do I feel the same now about the ideas expressed? Do I feel differently? We are now going to look at the second blog post that I ever wrote. It was published in September of 2009, and it is called Backwards and Forwards. And a side note, I stole that title from the title of a theater book and then proceeded later on in my blogging career to write another post about that theater book. So if you search for Backwards and Forwards on my blog, you will find not only this post that I'm sharing with you, but also the one on the book that I borrowed the title from. Backwards and Forwards. I was having lunch today with a good friend, and as usual, after we were done, she pulled out a couple decks. I suggested we swap readings, which we did. I had hardly gotten through two of the cards in the spread I was reading for her, though, before she stopped me and asked me to repeat something. I had mentioned a technique she had never heard of, and she wanted more info. I explained and then proceeded with her reading, but she was already pulling out another deck and sorting the cards to work with this new technique. It seems like that's what happens when I read for other readers. They usually get much more excited by the techniques they observe in my reading style than the substance of the reading itself. The technique I used for her reading is something I call backwards and forwards. I observed that the wands and sword suits move backwards through the numbers. The 10 is the beginning of the suit, and the suit process ends at 1. The cups and pentacles suits move forward, starting with 1 and moving toward 10. I discovered this through a combination of my meditative work with the cards and specifically through my ongoing work with the Kabbalistic Tetragrammaton and the permutation of the divine name, as well as through practical experience. I notice that when we get the 10 of Wands or the 10 of Swords in a reading, often one of the most positive things we can say is that the cycle is over, and that's something to be thankful for. But something about that never quite felt right. The 10 of Wands does not seem to lead to the Ace of Cups as it would if the cycle were over and the next cycle beginning, based on placing the pips in numerical and suit order, Ace through 10, Wands, Cups, Swords, Pentacles. But it does make sense for the 10 of Wands to lead to the 9. The sticks carried in the oppressive burden of the 10 can be used to create the protective wall of the 9, the strong boundaries of which guide the swift flying 8 to come to rest so that the valor of the 7 can be realized, and so on using the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith imagery. Using this technique, the good news in a reading when the 10 of Wands or 10 of Swords comes up is not so much that the querent is at the end of a cycle, but that although the querent may be in an uncomfortable place, we have a set of instructions for how to start from this place and take realistic, practical steps towards the ultimate goal of the suit. As we work down through the wands, finding the stability of the 4, stepping through what I consider to be the open door of the 3, finding the sovereignty of the 2, and coming to rest at the generative spark of the Ace. We can now naturally find a receptive container for that spark in the Ace of Cups. And having learned dominion of ourselves, can begin working successfully in collaboration with another, and so on through the emotional and relationship-oriented suit of Cups. The suits of Wands and Swords, both active masculine suits, have a sense of movement to them. The 10 of Cups and the 10 of Pentacles, the receptive feminine suits, are comfortable places to rest. They do not call us to take action the way the Wands and Swords do. However, if one were to stay too long in the success of the 10 of Cups, If perhaps it were reversed and one started feeling indulgent with it, then certainly it's possible that the depression of the Ten of Swords would result, moving us into our next suit, which we would then work through in reverse order. The Ace of Swords and the Ace of Pentacles match nicely too, whether you view them as sword and shield, or if you see in that pairing the flaming sword that turns before the gate of the Garden of Eden, shown in the Ace of Pentacles. In many ways, it takes a great deal of storytelling sense to count down the suits of wands, up the suit of cups, down the suit of swords, then up the suit of pentacles, moving backwards and forwards through the pips. And this was first published September 13th, 2009. So what do I feel about this? This is an interesting one because I joke a lot of times in classes and when I'm leading meetups and stuff, I often joke, anybody asks any question, I'm like, I have a blog post on that. And so many questions that I get, I don't even take the time to answer anymore. I send people off to my blog to read and answer. This is one that I share a lot because I think it's a really good technique. And so even though it's 11 years old, I definitely refer people to this quite a bit. However, I have to admit, I haven't read it all the way through, and I don't know how long, possibly not since I wrote it. Probably I've read it since then, but it's been a really long time since I've actually read it, even though I have recommended it quite recently to people. And so there's things in here that are still catching my eye and still going, oh, that's a good point. And one of the most interesting things, in fact, the time I most recently shared it was with my numerology class. I taught a fairly in-depth, fairly comprehensive, well, maybe not comprehensive, but a fairly in-depth class on the numbers 1 through 10 based on Kabbalistic numerology. And so I really have, I've really explored the sequence of numbers from a lot of different viewpoints. This is only one of them. And I have to admit that the standard Kabbalistic approach of going 1 through 10 down the tree of life in the world of fire, absolute, and then moving on from 10 to 1 in the world of Bria, which is water, cups, and going 1 through 10, 10 becomes 1, and so on down through the successive trees, because that's the right way, it's the standard way, it's the way everybody knows about, and it's the way that's always taught. I do admit that I have become quite accustomed to using that. Every once in a while, I do pull out this other technique, but really quite infrequently. And as I read it now, I'm like, I really should use it more. I should process that way more. I think just reading it now, I'm like, wow, that makes more sense. It really does. And Kabbalistically, there is the maxim, the way of thinking, I don't know what the principle, that Malkut is the cater of a new tree. So Malkut is number 10, and that 10 is the cater, number 1 of a new tree. And standard numerology does not go to 10. It stops at 9 because 10 reduces to 1. Standard numerology ends at 9 and then returns back to 1. Now, tarot doesn't. Tarot doesn't stop at 9. It goes on to the 10. And so, and because Malkut is the cater of a new tree, I tend to work with that. 10 of Wands becomes the Ace of Cups. 10 of Swords becomes the 10 of Cups becomes the Ace of Swords. 10 of Swords becomes the Ace of Pentacles. What I write here makes so much sense. That I might have to eschew traditional Kabbalah and start teaching this a lot more than I am. What really caught my eye, I remembered the descent, and the descent makes a lot of sense for me. Going backwards through the wand suit, going backwards through the sword suit, totally makes a lot of sense in both of those suits. But the thing that got me this time was the aces, or was the idea of that it hands off ace to ace. That's what gets me. It's you come down that suit of wands from the 10, you arrive at the ace, and it hands off to the next ace, and that the spark of the Ace of Wands finds its container, which is a very Kabbalistic metaphor, Chokmah and Bina. The spark of the Ace of Wands gets handed off to the container of the Ace of Cups, and then we go up into the 10 of Cups. The again, to stay there too long and not to continue forward would result in a lethargy that we could see in the 10 of Swords. I totally follow that and find that that's a really useful way of thinking about it. Back descending the suit of swords into that Ace of Swords, and that it matches so beautifully with the Ace of Pentacles. And I always think of that image of the flaming sword at the gate of Eden when I think of the Ace of Swords and Ace of Pentacles combined. So it's just really interesting, and that leads us into our final suit and an ascent through Pentacles, arriving at the 10, which Kabbalistically is a descent through the tree, but anyway. So yeah, I'm super fascinated by this. I think that it's not only a great post that I'll continue to share, but I really think that I should be teaching this. I'm really liking it and feeling really strongly about it right now. So we'll see where it goes. I definitely want to add that, review it more, continue to include it in the whenever I teach about numbers. So I was really glad to get a chance to look at this one. Thanks for looking at it with me. Bye.